All right, welcome to our Q&A, our webinar. For those of you that are filing in here, again, welcome and thank you for joining us. I am Nick Dianti, and with us today is Brad Balukjian, author of The Wax Pack, On the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. Brad, thank you for joining us here this evening.
Thanks very much for having me, Nick. It's
All
a pleasure.
right. Well, Brad, it's good to see you, and I'm so excited that you were finally able to make this book a reality after many years of working on it. We have people here who are joining us this evening, and if you are joining us and you want to be a part of what's going on, you will see that there is a Q&A box, and we encourage you to submit your questions for Brad through the Q&A, and they will be answered live on air. You also can check in with each other in the chat as well. So Brad, many people out there that have seen and heard about the book probably want to know, just looking at the cover, why did you go to a pack of baseball cards to start this journey?
Well, what I love about the single pack is the random factor. I think any of us that collected cards can remember the thrill of the unknown. You open up the pack and then there's the surprise waiting for you, whatever's on top. And then, with each of the 15 cards, you get another little mini surprise. And so for me, even the pack itself kind of resembled a book in that you have 15 cards in a pack and maybe 15 chapters in a book. So I thought if I wanted to write about what happened to the baseball players that I grew up idolizing as my heroes, that the device of the single pack would be a great way to get at that in a fun way, sort of being constrained by whatever random guys are in this pack. Those are the guys that I now have to try to hunt down and really turn it into this quest. I think some of the best stories and books and whatever medium have to do with some kind of quest that the protagonist has.
And Brad, you talk about a quest, and the concept of the book of you traveling across the country is a large part of the journey that you have here in this book. What is it that you expected to find out when you started? So, you got the cards, you open your pack, you come to narrow it down. All right, this is the group that I want to go after. And once you found that it was feasible and you're like, all right, I'm going to go do this, what were you expecting to discover during this journey?
Yeah, well, one of the fun things about any quest is that you're guaranteed to have things pop up that you didn't expect. And so what started as sort of the simple idea of, is there life after baseball? What happened to these guys that I grew up idolizing and collecting? As I was on the road, it quickly became obvious that there were going to be these other themes that made the book even that much better. So realizing that how many of these guys had complicated relationships with their fathers, for example, realizing that a lot of these guys actually had a lot of wisdom about how to live your life. I mean, in the book, I call them accidental Buddhists, because without even realizing it, they're really good about sort of being in the present moment and knowing what they could control and what they couldn't control. And so as I was on the road, some of those themes started to emerge and allowed me to kind of, tailor my questioning in that way as I met more and more people.
Brad, you spent an inordinate amount of time on the road, probably more than what most authors would imagine about taking on a journey like this. How did you keep it together being on the road, for dolo, as we like to say, or solo, by yourself for that amount of time, in the car, traveling, thousands and thousands of miles till you got to your next journey?
Well, it helped to meet nice guys like you along the way. So Nick and I met on the road when I was in New York. So I was in New York for maybe 3 or 4 nights. I stayed with a friend to cut down on costs. And I had the meetup with Lee Mazzilli, and then I had the whole thing with Doc Gooden, which was like, unfolding in in real time being, this sort of where's Doc kind of storyline as he didn't show up. And then in the middle of all that in Brooklyn, I got to meet up with you. And so, there were moments where it was really difficult and lonely. That kind of journey is exhausting. And because I was also, I would go, first of all, I was driving sometimes up to 600 miles in a day. And then if I met with somebody, after I met with a player or a source, I would then have to go back to my room and, write everything down and start to collect all my research. And I was trying to blog every day. So it was very much of a working trip. But at the same time, I was very aware and reminding myself of this is like a unique once in a lifetime experience. So enjoy it while you go, so it was, even at the worst times, I was still enjoying it a lot.
And, Brad, at that stage of your life, right, here you are in your mid 30s, and you reference this in the book often, that's around the time that when most of these guys wrapped up their playing career. And here you are, in the middle of your tenure as a college professor, and then taking all this time off to, travel the country and find your journey. And meanwhile, you're catching up with them after the fact. How was that like a growth experience for you at that stage of your life, knowing you're meeting these guys, 25 years after the fact?
Yeah, it was kind of cool the guys again that were my heroes as a kid, to now kind of get life advice from them. Right. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of one of the biggest things that I took out of the book, was seeing my heroes in kind of a new light. And when you're a kid, you sort of see these guys as these larger than life figures. And then as an adult, now being in my mid 30s and kind of, having a lot of questions about where I want to go in my life, I was able to ask them for advice on, what they did when they were in my shoes, or they were in their mid 30s and finishing playing baseball, and, what do you do next? And I found that a lot of their wisdom was compatible with I talked about my OCD and the therapy that I went through and how I got through that. And a lot of what some of the players, people like Don Carmen, said lined up very nicely with the therapy that I had received in terms of dealing with some of those issues.
And for people that may not know, right, Carmen is like a sports psychologist, and is very prominent in that field, and has many major leaguers as his clients. And so, who best to get advice from Don Carmen. And but Carmen was oddly enough like your hero growing up. And during that time period, people might say, well, why wasn't Eric Davis or Roger Clemens or Dwight Gooden? You went for like the middle of the road lefty on the Philadelphia Phillies. How was it, that experience for you, meeting your quote unquote cardboard hero?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I'm definitely unusual in that, having my favorite player be someone like Don Carmen, who was a journeyman, not a star player. But in terms of getting to meet him, that was maybe the hardest part of the book, in terms of how do I approach this in a way that I don't want to be like too much of a fanboy and, kind of geek out on the excitement of that, because I really I was really trying to always maintain my role as a journalist. Obviously I bring certain biases in, and I try to be honest in the book about my biases, but I knew with Carmen, when I meet up with him in Naples, Florida, I had just met up with his mom and his brothers and seen his hometown in Western Oklahoma. And I knew there were some things about his past that I wanted to ask about that were really difficult. I mean, so
yes,
on the one hand, you're about to ask your childhood, you're about to have a conversation and meet your childhood hero. On the other hand, you're about to ask your childhood hero about his father, who he clearly had a bad relationship with. And so the idea that I know I'm about to go make my childhood hero really uncomfortable made me really uncomfortable. And yet I felt a commitment to the story that transcended whatever my own insecurities were.
And Brad, that story that you're bringing up, without giving away the whole story, because I really think it's a pivotal point in the book. When Carmen revealed that information about his father, what was that like for you, being there and him telling you something that was so dark?
Yeah, there's no better word for it. I mean, I tried to capture that in the narrative about how I felt like stuck. Like I kind of wanted to like reach out and hug him, because here he is, like kind of getting really emotional, but I can't do that. I mean, I'm in there as a capacity as a writer, and I would think it just would have been even more sort of awkward. So I really just tried to not do anything. I think sometimes the best thing you can do is just let the moment sit and deal with it, And he's a highly emotionally intelligent guy, Don Carmen. I mean, I'd say way above anyone else that I met in the pack. And so when you're with someone who's that self-aware, it's not a problem. They roll with it, and we, after that moment, we went on and talked more about other things. So I think really it brings, to be that vulnerable brings you closer to somebody.
And I caught Carmen at a pretty vulnerable moment, and I was actually with your assistance of putting me in touch with him right after Darren Dalton's passing, and he told me a really emotional story, how he was bedside with him when he passed, and was traveling hours a day back and forth to be with him. And I didn't know that when calling. I just said, "Hey, Dutch passed. I know Don." Put me in touch with him, and Don opened up in a way that was very emotional. So I got to feel a little bit of that, but at the same time, I can get where he's saying how emotionally intelligent he is, because it's occupational for him, but what makes him good at what he does. I'm looking here, and again, for those that are listening, if you want to ask us any questions, just put them in the Q&A box. We got a few up there. We will get to them. So if any questions for Brad about the book or the journey, please feel free to ask them. Again, the book is called The Wax Pack: On the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. Brad, they often say, and I probably don't have this like 100% correct, but a ball player usually lives two lives, right? It's like his playing life and then everything else after that. And your book really is a lot about the latter, not so much about the former. And so how did you capture that afterlife of a baseball player in The Wax Pack?
Yeah, and that may disappoint some people, because people that are, baseball fans are so passionate that they can't get enough of the baseball content. And again, you could take the idea of a pack and write many different types of books with that conceit. I made the decision at some point that I was not going to hyper focus on the baseball stories, even though I personally find them very interesting because I'm a big baseball fan. So to me, it was about, for each player, I had compiled a giant manila folder of all the articles of their career that I had read through and done my research. And I used that to kind of know the story of their baseball life. And there were just enough pieces and hints in that file to start to get me to think of what kinds of questions did I want to ask that would get them to reveal stuff about their personal life. And really, what are these guys like as people? And so my strategy for that was to be upfront with them about being interested in the off the field stuff, but also to try to get them to be in different scenarios where we're just kind of hanging out, so instead of just a sit down interview, as you'll see in the book, I go and do a lot of things with the players, whether it's getting a hitting lesson or going to an art museum and going to an Andy Warhol exhibit with Jaime Kokenauer. It just made the conversation much more comfortable. And then I was also willing to put myself into the story and to talk about myself. So if I was going to ask something really personal about a relationship, I would volunteer my own story as well. Mm. And I think that type of journalism where you're actively involved in the narrative is not as common anymore. But I really, it's my style. I really like doing that, and I think it's where I'm the strongest as a writer.
And Brad, that definitely comes through in the book. And you were able to connect a bit of the narrative about you said earlier your own struggles with OCD and getting treatment for that, and then also your relationship with your father, and baseball is really a sport that relies heavily on that father-son connection. What did you see from the players about that father-son connection, and how did you reflect on your own experience with your dad going through this trip to write the book?
Yeah, well, you see kind of the dark side of that relationship a lot in the book, right? So, we have the Field of Dreams, portrayal of fathers and sons. And there are certainly a lot of great fathers in the book. I mean, Lee Mazzilli's chapter really gets at that. Rance Mullenix's dad was there for him every step of the way. But then you get, Steve Yeager's dad drunk, passing out in the clubhouse, and Don Carmen's father being abusive, and even Carlton Fisk, who I don't really spend any time with, telling his backstory about, the great story in there about how Fisk was this all-star, all-state basketball player. He actually was maybe more interested in playing basketball than baseball when he was in high school. And his basketball team goes to the state championship and they lose, but Fisk scores like 40 some points, has a great game. And the first thing his dad says to him when he sees him after the game is, "You missed 2 free throws." And it's like, that just says so much about maybe why Fisk is who he is. So
Mhm.
the father-son relation, I mean, it just goes to show you, I mean, not just fathers and sons, but parents and children, in general, what a role parenting has from such an early age on who somebody becomes.
Right. And some of the guys push through because playing Major League Baseball is not easy, and so many of the players had said that, throughout their career, in terms of what it takes to be a Major League Baseball player and hold on, and the training and the travel and everything else that comes along with it. And others, like you said, like Fisk, maybe that's why he was the way he was, with the media and going through his post career that way. And I think that's an interesting chapter that people will find too, about, for every player that was somewhat of a slam dunk, you had someone like Fisk who was, evasive, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that adds to the story, that not everybody was a layup, or I should say a 3-0 fastball, right?
Right. And, it brings up some interesting questions, like how much of a responsibility do these guys have to give back to fans, or to
Yeah.
talk to media? I mean, they're not playing anymore. So, and it is, and there is a difference. I'll admit, like, certainly being Carlton Fisk, there's a lot more demands on you than being Jaime Kokenauer, right? So it's not exactly a fair comparison.
Right. No, it's not. And I've had a chance to interview that kind of wide range of players. And it's interesting. Some of the guys that maybe didn't have the big careers are open to talk. And then other times they're like, that part of my life is done. And,
Yeah.
I want to move on.
Well, that is one thing I
Yeah.
found. I was actually surprised at how across the board, very few guys really wanted to talk about their baseball careers.
Right.
I didn't think they were. I was surprised that they were less nostalgic than I thought they would be.
And that's what I was actually just going to get into, was that, we have our own nostalgia of being outside of the game and growing up in fans, and even whether we played in high school, college, there's different between getting paid to play and then, basically paying to play, right? And but they may look at their careers in a different light. What can you describe for the people that are here watching, how our own nostalgia plays from watching as a fan, and then how they look at their careers, post playing days?
Yeah, I think most of them have. Again, they're really grateful for what they did and for their careers and for the fans. I think they really, appreciate what they did. That what they did was special. But I think, as Don Carmen said, once you stop playing, it's like you wake up and you realize you never get to go back to sleep and dream again. And
Mm-hmm.
and Lee Mazzilli talked about this too, where it's almost a little bit painful to dredge too much of that up, because it's a reminder of something that's gone forever, and you can never get back. Right. So
And I think so many athletes run into that.
there's some
Like, you can't hit the
self-preservation.
fastball anymore.
There's some self-preservation there, but I think there's also, like, when you play baseball, and most of these guys played a long time, and you sort of normalize it to some extent, in that, I say at the end of the book that we often fantasize about what it would be like to be a Major League Baseball player. And I think the reality is actually that we already know. Like if you've been a part of any team, whether it's your local softball team or your church chorus or your gardening club or whatever it is, that camaraderie is what these guys value the most about their experience. It's not anything to do with baseball intrinsically. Rance Mullinick said, if you gave me a choice between going back in time and going 4 for 4 or hitting 2 doubles and a home run, or hanging out with Jesse Barfield and Tony Fernandez and just, sitting around having a good time, he would pick the latter every time. So, and that's also why I chose to open and close the book with the Topps factory workers, because I wanted to show that the beauty of baseball is way beyond the players. It's the community, the sense of community and camaraderie that the game engenders and creates that can exist in so many different ways. And the people that literally, I have, here are the cards themselves from the way, the people in the factory that literally made these.
Right. And you'll see those cards in the book, folks.
They experience the same thing that Major League Baseball players did. Now, of course, when you make your debut and you play in front of 40,000 people, that's something that we can't relate to, but that wears off really quickly, And so I don't think they, other than those sort of, all these guys remember their first at bat or their first game, but the rest of it is largely a blur because it becomes this routine that they go through.
Right. You wake up, you go to the ballpark, you go back, you go out, you wake up, go again 3 days later, like you're in the next city times, 6 months. Right. And it does string together after a while. Brad, what was the most difficult point in the process for you, knowing that, you had started this, I don't want to speak out of hand, 2015?
Well, that really started in 2014 and then the trip was in 2015. Yeah.
Right. And so what was the hardest part for you in this whole process? Because this was a long time from beginning to end.
Yeah, by far the hardest part was getting it published with a book deal, and that's a whole nother part of this process is how hard it is to get published and to get a publisher. And so it took so long because after I took the trip, then I had to try to get a book deal. And so that involved having a proposal that I wrote and rewrote and then going off to the publishing world. And there's basically 5 companies, the big 5 that control all publishing. And so I just got a lot of rejection from pitching the book. And it was frustrating because the reasons I was getting rejected were not anything to do with the writing or the idea. It was like, well, you don't have a big enough platform. You're not a celebrity. You don't have 100,000 Instagram followers. And so it was like really frustrating because it's like, well, how do you ever discover new voices and new writers if you don't take a risk on someone, who doesn't already have that following?
And, Brad, the response has just been excellent on social media, because I guess that's where everyone's hanging out right about now. And, everywhere I turn in the baseball circles, I see the book coming up, right? I think the cover, in a sense, is going to attract a lot of people again, right? You can see the wax pack cover. It looks like a pack of Topps baseball cards. But when you really dig into the book, I get the sense that this is going to be kind of like one of those landmark projects, almost in the sense of like a Glory There Times, where you're telling this narrative of the players that's not often told. How do you feel the response has been thus far since the book has come out?
Yeah, and I should just finish by saying I'm grateful. My previous thought, I'm grateful that eventually the University of Nebraska, when I went, they're a smaller publisher, but they do a lot of great baseball books, and they were fantastic to work with, and they were instantly interested in the project. But yeah, in terms of the response, I've been really happy. The social media thing is great. I just, I look at my role as sort of, the proxy for so many of us from that generation. So I can bring them into the room and, have them experience what it was like to be with these players. And so seeing how many people have told me their stories about it, how it dredged up or it brought up feelings about their own fathers and their sons. And that's all very touching to know that people have had an emotional response to the book, which is what I wanted. I wanted this to be more emotional than intellectual. So, I mean, and different books have different purposes and meanings. This one I think was largely rooted in the emotion of things. And so, I mean, it's also been an awkward time to to release a book. I mean, I fully am aware that, this book is small potatoes in the scheme of what's happening now in the world with the coronavirus, but and things like my book tour, which I was supposed to be on the road right now, are now shot for the time being. But at the same time, some unexpected things have come out of it. Like, we've formed this pandemic baseball book club. Several writers, Jason Turbo, who's written many baseball books, Eric Nussbaum, Anika Orok, we all have books coming out right now that have been affected. So we all came together to form this club, and we're promoting each other's books and doing a podcast. So it's been, I don't think that would have happened if we were not in these unusual times.
Right. And maybe we wouldn't be here to bring this to you. And again, we have Brad Balukjian, author of The Wax Pack, and just to show you. So again, if you're not sure what cover looks like, there's a cover, nice, real clear shot.
I just love how beat up it looks already, No, I mean, that's part of the design, the worn,
right. All the wrinkles of opening, right. Technically a wax pack. If you have questions for Brad, please put them in the Q&A. I'm actually going to get to a few questions right now. We really appreciate everybody that is sticking with us. So our buddy Mac Salmon of Wax Ecstatic podcast asked, one of his favorite books was Mark Wood's Dodger Dogs at Fenway Franks, which followed Woods on his 1985 road trip to all then 26 MLB parks. Since then, numerous people have done similar trips to hit all 30 parks in a season, sometimes even for charity. Do you hope that the Wax Pack book inspires others to research the lives of players in a pack, just short of actually interviewing them like you did?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I've been asked a lot if I want to do a sequel, and the answer is no. I mean, it would be fun, but I don't think it could capture what I did here. But I would love for people to take this idea and run with it and do different sports or different years. And again, you could write so many different types of books with this idea. You don't even have to write a book. You could do a podcast, you could do whatever. But the idea of something being based around a pack is just a really fun idea, because it evokes the surprise and the thrill that it's so hard to come by, I think, in our society now, where we have so much at our fingertips, right? It's almost too much. There's just so much choice out there in terms of content, and everything can be customized. So, replicating that thrill of the pack is a great thing.
Right. And if anyone has ever collected cards for whatever period of time, that mystery that hides behind the wrapper, I think, is what keeps a lot of people interested in cards. And speaking of packs, Steve Brightman asks, which pack did you choose? So I guess he's a little behind on this, but and how did you decide on it? So how did you come to that 1986 Topps pack?
Right. So I actually did. So someone else asked in the chat where I got the pack. So I think a lot of people that collected cards in that era saved their packs thinking they were going to be worth a lot of money, so they kept them sealed. And we know that now that really, the packs from before 86 have some value, but 86 on, they were just so mass produced that I was able to get a pack for like $2 on eBay. And I did get multiple packs because I knew that if I just got one and too many guys had passed away, or everyone lives in Indiana or something, it's not going to make for a great road trip book. But I was very conscientious to not move cards between the packs. So the pack that I picked because almost everyone was alive except for Al Cowens. It helped that Don Carmen, my favorite player, was in there, but I didn't open packs until I got Don Carmen. So.
Right, you didn't Frankenstein the packs.
Right, and then the guys were spread out across the country, so I knew that would make for a good road trip. Yeah,
and speaking of the road trip, geez, Brad, I mean, you turned into a road warrior. How many miles did you put on your car and offhand? Like, what did this cost just in gas to make this?
Perhaps even more shockingly, I'm still driving the same 2002 Honda Accord. So it's now got 250,000 miles on it. I drove 11,341 miles in 49 days, 30 states. And yeah, it was not, I mean, I was self-financing the whole thing. You know, I had to pay for the gas and the lodging and all that. So it wasn't cheap, and I was taking a big risk on myself in the whole process. But I, there were long driving days, but it's like being on an adrenaline rush for 7 weeks. I was just
Hmm.
so excited by what I was doing that it kept me going.
Right. And who had Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts coffee?
Yeah, that was that ended up, you have to entertain yourself somehow. That didn't
Sure.
end up in the final book, but if you remember the blog, I had this like game with myself. It's like where across the country does Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks become more dominant? And it's like as you go east, Dunkin' Donuts starts to take hold.
Hmm. Um, Brad, a few more questions. We really appreciate your time. Brad, while we're checking on the questions, can you tell people about your website, waxpackbook.com, and
Yeah.
where they can get the book?
Yeah, sure. So waxpackbook.com. I'm also on Twitter at waxpackbook. And if you go to the website, there's also the link to the podcast that we're doing with the Pandemic Baseball Book Club, with writers interviewing other writers. So we're up to 19 writers right now, which is great. All have books coming out related to baseball right now. And in terms of ordering the book, at that website, there are links to different places. And I always encourage people to try to support the local independent bookstores right now. So bookshop.org is doing a lot of great business with that.
Yeah, definitely trying to keep the independent bookstores going. Brad, Blake Jameson wants to know, how do you stay disciplined while writing this book? You talk about having, piles and piles of folders, almost like what, from speaking to Jeff Pearlman, how he just goes, really like, every detail. How did you stay disciplined with that, with all that information at your hands? And did the writing come in waves, or, how did that wind up working for you?
I love that question because it gets at the process. And so I'm always interested in talking to writers or prospective writers about process. So a lot of the work was not actually, so a lot of the prep for the writing was reading these old articles. I would have notebooks where I would take notes off of the articles and, mark down which seemed like the most relevant passages. And then I had files on each guy's. Transcribing the interviews was the most painful part because I farmed some of that out because it was too much. But it actually helps when you listen to the recordings yourself and transcribe it yourself. It helps to hear the guys' voices. Transcription took forever, so then I would go back through the transcripts and highlight, the parts that were the most relevant. Because it took so long to get a publisher, I had a lot of time to work with work with the transcripts and the research material. So I actually wrote most of the book in about 5 months. Once I had the book deal, and I had I calendared it out. It was like I was writing about a chapter every week to 2 weeks. And so I would be like, okay, I just gotta write this. And so I would almost look at each chapter. I mean, if you look at how the chapters are laid out, it's almost very cinematic in that there's like 4 or 5 scenes in every chapter. And I try to construct it that way. Like, what are, if I have a given player, what are the 4 or 5 scenes that are going to best tell the story? And in some cases that involved writing a flashback scene. In other cases, it involved sort of some exposition based on historical research. A lot of it was just, me describing in the moment, in the present tense. And I decided to write it in the present tense instead of the past tense to really put the reader in my shoes. And so I was sort of taking it scene by scene, and it would think about it almost visually as well. That helped me structure it. But the best thing about writing is when you get in that zone, you're locked in, you're in that kind of creative mindset. And so I would sit there and be able to, focus on a scene and just start to go. But it took it took a while to get all that research done.
Yeah, I can imagine just plowing through all of it, and especially with all the audio transcription. And for folks that haven't done that,
Well,
Brad might, I don't know, he's not estimating. It's a lot to transcribe. It's a lot to transcribe. I've been there and
and
done that.
I'm kind of envious of people that write fiction because I feel like this kind of book, which really is narrative or creative nonfiction, it uses the techniques of fiction in a nonfiction book. So I use dialogue and I use point of view and a lot of detail from different scenes. So I felt at times like I was having to write two books, one, just getting the facts straight as a nonfiction book, and two, writing it in this sort of compelling way that would keep the reader really emotionally invested.
And Brad, that's what I think the people will find. So for those of you that have not read the book, I think that's what you will find intriguing. And once I finished reading the book, I gave Brad a call and let him know almost those exact sentiments that, it's that fiction way of writing that you're describing that really helps to make this book what it is. It's because, you have that narrative of your voice and really almost cinematically like setting up each of the scenes that makes these stories, again, other than you just, getting the quotations from it and running with it, that you're interjecting,
Right.
And
I think
the narrative and everything else that's going on around it.
Part of establishing that voice is, as a writer, you have to be willing to take risks and be vulnerable yourself. Right. So here I am talking about, some of these players and some of their really dark stories or really personal stories. Well, I felt like to get the reader to emotionally invest in me, I had to reveal a lot about myself. So I talk about my relationships and the mistakes I made and my OCD and my struggle with that. And that was all a very conscious choice to make me a well-rounded character in the book and to show both my good and negative or bad sides, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And like you said, that's what brings a story out. Brad, one of the readers asked Max what I think it is, and Max asked, this is based on baseball cards. Baseball cards are having a big resurgence. Have you dipped your toes in the water at all with collecting since putting the book out?
Not so. Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I've learned a little bit about like the hobby now with the breaks and the opening, watching online, and it's changed a lot. I haven't started like actively collecting again. I'm interested in knowing, like, do little kids participate, or has it become really just an adult thing? And it seems like it's more of an adult thing now. But
well, I think the price point has made it more of an adult thing. But I think one thing I've observed, especially during this time, during the pandemic, is a lot of the fathers and sons are getting back into collecting and staying at home and doing this, doing this together. But right, walking in a card shop with like $1 in your pocket, they're hard to find, right? And coming out with a pack or two, at the time is really difficult to find. So I'm going to take one more question here, and this is from Paul Madors, and he said he really enjoyed the book, and since you wrote the book without a publisher, what was the editorial process like, and how much did the editor help guide you? So he says, in short, was the finished product exactly how you hoped? So I know you talked about the process, but what was it like once you got to the editor, and then when we got it to what we have here?
Yeah. So when I handed in the whole manuscript, then my editor at the publisher had to do his edit, and then it goes to a copy editor for just the strict copy grammatical things. I actually was surprised at how light my edit was. My editor, great guy, did a really good job. I was actually grateful that I think one nice thing about working with a small publisher is you can sometimes retain a little more control, in that, like, I got to keep the titles, the wax pack, and then the subtitle on the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. That was all my original content. They didn't change it. I was worried, like anyone would be, about a heavy edit where they really try to change everything. And I was able to keep most, what I wanted in there. One of the things that early on, when I was trying to get a publisher, I was pushed hard by a lot of agents and editors to write a very different type of book, which would have been.
I remember you telling me that. Yep.
Yeah, more of just strictly baseball. And I'm glad I pushed back, because I basically said, like, no, I have a very specific vision for this. I'm only interested in doing that. And maybe it cost me a deal at a bigger publishing house, but I don't really care because this is the book that I wanted to write, you know. And at some point I made a decision that this really is, it's personal, it's a passion project. That's the most important thing beyond the economics.
And then Brad, you know, you talk a lot about the risks that you took, and including just, you know, starting the trip, right? And it was a big financial risk, and what are you going to get out of the players? And then waiting so you really could get a publisher so that you could tell the story your way. You know, to finish this up, what have you learned, you know, about that feel of taking that kind of a risk and putting yourself out there to be able to finally come up with the book that you wanted?
Yeah, I think you can stick to your principles and you know, follow your vision, as long as you make sure to do your homework, right? Like, as long as you put in the time and you do the research and you really maximize your effort in terms of studying the whole landscape of what it is you need to do and who the players are, you've done your part, and you have a good product, then I think, you know, if you can stick to your guns and you believe in it, and it's gonna, you know, you'll see it through it, and you'll make it a success. So there's a certain degree of like diligence that I think you have to have, that a lot of projects in general has as much to do with your diligence and as it does with the idea itself. I mean, you know, you can have an idea is only an idea, right? To the harder part, and the part that often is a separator, is are you willing to take the risk and put the time in for the execution? And that's what is the hard part. And so if you're willing to do that, then I think, you know, you'll get there, and you'll just stay true to whatever your vision is. And it's also about, really honestly, like, when you start a project, what is your goal? You know, is your goal to just get this personal thing out there? Is it your goal to make money? Is your goal to, you know, advance your career? I mean, if you're honest about that right from the beginning, then you're going to set up realistic expectations for yourself. And everyone's goal can be different. You know, it's not like everyone who writes a book has the same goal.
True. And very true words to wrap this up. Again, the book is called The Wax Pack: On the Open Road in Search of Baseball's Afterlife. You can connect with Brad at waxpackbook.com or on Twitter at waxpackbook. If you want to follow me, I'm at Examine Baseball. The website is baseballhappenings.net. We'd love it if you connected with us. And Brad, one more time, can you give us the indie bookshop where, you know, you're saying directing people to get the book?
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Nick. And, you know, I think you and I, we take a lot of pride in responding to people. And, you know, when people hit us on Twitter or email, like, conscientious about writing people back, I've always been, that's one of my pet peeves, is like responding to people and, you know, giving them my time. Because you know, writing a book is an investment. Reading a book is an investment. It's a different level of investment than listening to a song or watching a TV show. I mean,
right.
It probably takes 8 or 9 hours to read my book. So I really appreciate that. And you were always a believer from the beginning. So I appreciate your support. But yeah, you can go to bookshop.org, waxpackbook.com, and you can find all the details there.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone who tuned in. We really appreciate that you took the time when you could have been anywhere else to join us. So again, the book, The Wax Pack. Brad, thank you again. Be well in your travels.
All right. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.